right. Seeing people hop on, Good, good. Hope you're doing well this morning. Hope nobody drove in to the classroom. Sorry if you did. Today should be pretty fun from a topic perspective. It's really the building block for a lot of stuff we'll be doing. So I really encourage people to pay attention during this session, even if it's sort of fun and not that hard per se, but there'll be a lot of little topics that are going to get introduced that we'll definitely need to go over again in different ways going forward. But today we're going to take the topic that we started with last time, which was talking about building modules and working with modules and how we can do that. And we're going to start pulling in modules from this larger ecosystem instead of just working with the ones that we write ourselves. There were some questions around just how modules work, how you can, let me see if I can go back and double check the one here, see if I can understand it better. It's talking about exporting. Okay, there were some, so there were some questions about, I guess, when you export a module, can you specify what can use it? So for example, if we go back, before we dive into the NPM stuff, let's talk about this a little bit, if I can get it up. And this stuff is going to be broken right now anyways because of stuff that we changed. But let me open this index.js. So this was also importing this hello, right? And our app.js is importing hello, which we've got closed right now. Which we changed to say we're only exporting, say, something from there. So if I were to try and run the index.js file right now, it should fail because we're never exporting, say, hello. Just double check that stuff. Okay, yep. So I'm going to change this to the say something so we know it'll work, right? That should work. Okay, there we go. So that's just getting it in a state that we can work with. Will this work? What's the keyboard command on? There we go. I'll just split some stuff side by side here so we can talk about it a little bit. Maybe I can even do a triple one if we can see it all. All right. So let me open the index on this one. There we go. This might be a little small on your screens, but so one of the questions was revolving around when you're exporting something. Oh, not index. I want this to be app.js. Or let me open index.js over here. Or wait. I want app.js there. Hello here. There we go. So one of the questions revolved around when you're exporting something like this hello.js file is exporting the say something method or function. Can I specify what other files are allowed to use it? So is there some way to say only app.js can import from hello.js, but not index.js? And the short answer of that is really no. And that's because there's this decoupling aspect that exists, which is the hello.js file knows nothing about any other file using it. It's intentional that it has zero knowledge about what's going to use it. And if you think about it, I hope it'll be more clear why that wouldn't be effective when we go through stuff today. But say you create a hello and all it says is hello and you upload that to this NPM package repository. it would be really hard for you to be able to say, oh, here it is, anyone can pull this down, but only packages that we've designated or only certain things that I've set up in some way are allowed to use it. There's really no way to tell someone else you can't use it in an effective way like that, right? To create that sort of connection would be really, really difficult. So it's much more like, oh, this is just accessible to everyone. Everyone can use this. They just have to import it and leverage it. Let me see if I can think of a real world parallel, because I really like to have real world parallels when I'm talking about stuff to try and compare. I mean, I guess maybe it's a little bit like public infrastructure almost is a parallel, right? Like when we create, I mean, we can put some rules around things, but we've got a sidewalk and you can't say, oh, this sidewalk, because it's public infrastructure, is only usable by Jared. I'm the only person who's allowed to walk on that sidewalk. No, it's this thing that's been built and now anyone can use it, right? And that's pretty much what happens package or exporting something, is anyone can pull that in and use it. Now you can, if you really want to, put special rules around it that maybe make something unable to use it without passing something in that verifies who they are. There's stuff like that you could do, but that's beyond just the basic concept of how you export something from a package and leverage it somewhere else. At a basic level, when you export something, anyone can use it. Now, one of the key things to remember about that, though, is when you export something, all it's doing is saying, when this gets read by whatever tool is going to use it, then these are the things that are available for something else. But it doesn't, exporting isn't like you put it on the NPM registry already. That's a whole separate process, a whole separate step. So exporting doesn't make it available to code, say, outside of your project or outside of what you're working in. Exporting only is a way for you to connect up files within your existing stuff. It's when you put something up on the NPM registry, okay, now it's available for other people to use. Now anyone can pull that down and use it. And even there's restrictions. You can create private packages on the NPM registry and say only people who are part of this organization are allowed to have access to those packages. That way you can leverage some of that while still keeping the separation as much as possible. I hope that helped clarify that a little bit. So today, we're going to talk and play with the NPM ecosystem. This is building on the concept of packages that we already worked on, except instead of talking about our own packages or our own modules as what we're working with, and we're going to keep working on those and building some of that stuff out, we're going to show just how much there is out there that we can leverage and sort of the scale of it and the different ways to pull some of this stuff down. So this is going to be a little bit of an overview at first, and then we'll do some small little examples of pulling some of these packages in and leveraging them. And if there's time, I might try and pull one down that I've used on projects at work, but I don't usually configure. But I might try and pull it down and show you a more complex setup or scenario of leveraging something to maybe change some of our tests over that we wrote the other day to something a little more interesting or a little more powerful, if you will. So let's start with what NPM is. A lot of people think, and I'm not going to go through all the names, I don't have it on here, but a lot of people think it stands for Node Package Manager. It actually doesn't. It's just, I don't even know if it has an actual name, but they have jokes about that up on their page. So if you go to the website for it, it's a little bit of a joke. They'll have different names for it every day. Not a number producing misery. 9-point mulligan, nuclear pizza machine, nettle pie market, noodles practicing medicine. And that's sort of their attempt to say it's not really Node Package Manager, even though a lot of people will refer to it that way. But what is it? It's two major components. There's some other stuff in there as well, but the biggest thing is it's this JavaScript software package repository. That's what we talked about last class a little bit. It's this place up here where there are, over 800,000 packages available that you can pull down and use. It's this huge repository of packages that you can access. But it's also a command line tool that's used to install and use packages from that registry. So it sort of meets both of these needs. One of the nice things about the command line tool, the NPM command line tool, is it gets installed when you install Node. So there's no explicit requirement for Node and NPM to go together the way that they do. They just packaged it up because it was really convenient to have a tool to fetch things from the package repository. And that makes it really easy to work with if you already have Node on your system, which all the Cloud9 environments you guys are working in should already have. So you guys already saw this. The registry is just at npmjs.com. And we'll be going there multiple more times as we talk about stuff today, just sort of showing off some of the content up there. So how do I work with this stuff? No Apex. I don't know what no Apex means. So let's see about how we can work with NPM packages, right? And the basic idea is the command you want to run most of the time when you're working with NPM packages is npm install and then the package name and then -- save. And that will install an NPM package in the project that you're working in right then. And there's a few things going on when this happens. When it's run, the specified package is downloaded from the NPM registry and installed in the node modules folder within the directory the command was run. You guys will see this in just a moment when we do maybe a very simple one. So that's the first thing that happens is it's going to run, it's going to download it, put it in this node modules folder. But the save portion that we had on that line, that -- save, is also important because that tells NPM to save the information about what package was or what packages you need installed, package.dll in the same folder. And you guys will, as I'm just sort of working through hands-on stuff, you'll get to see what that means and why that's useful in a few minutes. So one of the interesting things about how this NPM registry works is when you install a package, it doesn't install just that package. It makes sure that it installs any dependency that that package has that's also in the NPM registry. So installing one package sometimes, and again, I'll try and show this so that you can get a feel for how large this can grow really quickly, is sometimes can grow to hundreds of packages, even if you only installed a few packages. Like you didn't install very much at all, but now suddenly there's hundreds sitting in my node modules folder, and that's okay. Now, I'll also show, and I need to add it to these slides so that people absolutely remember this, is when you're working with node modules like this, never, ever, ever check the node modules folder. Well, I'll say never for you guys. There's rules when you're doing enterprise development that might be different. For you, never check the node modules folder into Git. And that's because that folder can get massive and very complicated, and there's no reason to do that. That's what that package JSON file is for. And I'll show you a little bit of how to do that. Let me take a note here that this afternoon, I'm going to work on that Git cheat sheet that we've been talking about for a while. Huge letters. And that will include some of this information about how to do this work that you're going to want to do. So the interesting thing is, how does it know which packages that the package you're installing depends on, right? I said it installs all of its dependencies. Well, it uses the package JSON, which we'll just go rewind a second. That's the information about what packages you installed for your stuff. Each package that you install usually has its own package JSON. Well, in fact, it has to if it's in the node NPM registry, because that's how it tells it what its name is. And so it uses the package JSON for the installed package to determine the information about what else it needs to install. So let's take a quick minute before we look at the different types of packages that are on NPM and work through a very, very simple example of a package. I'm actually going to steal one of these top ones. We'll use the UUID package, and then we'll come back and talk about it. So if you're at the NPM registry, just looking around for stuff, you can search for whatever you want. And I happen to know that I use this package or one like it. There's a lot of other ones very frequently at work. And what this does is it gives you, and this is a lot of technical mumbo jumbo here, but essentially it generates a unique identifier. It's a way to get a unique identifier that has a very, very, very low likelihood. I'm talking 1 in trillions likelihood of having a collision with anyone else's identifier anywhere else in the world. So it's very likely that this identifier is globally unique because it ends up looking like this. It's this huge string. So I'm going to work with this. And for the time being, I'll go ahead and do this work in my exercises folder, my Code the Dream JavaScript classwork folder. And let's just open up this index.js. Now, I'm not going to actually work or do that in here first. So I'm going to open up my command line within the folder that I want to be in. So let me double check my directory is my JavaScript classwork directory. All right, that's what I want. And I'm going to run that, what I told you, npm install. Let me double check here what the package is. It even tells me, oh, the package name is UUID. All right, npm install UUID -- save. So let's see what happens when I do this. First, we get a lot of ugly information being printed out in the command line here, telling us information about what it did. One of the first things it said is, oh, you don't have a package.json. That's because I'm just sort of working here in this loose folder. And so it wasn't able to add this information to my package.json, but it still was able to install it. So I'm going to redo this in just a moment because without a package.json, there's going to be some problems. But if we look over here, we'll see, sure enough, I've got a node modules folder now, as I was talking about. And that node modules folder has some stuff, this .bin, not that worried, but here's the UUID package. This is all of the stuff for this other JavaScript package that we just pulled in and we can leverage. And here's their package JSON that specifies information about what that package has. It gives it stuff like, here's the name, let me look for the name here, hold on. Here's the name, here's the license, here's where the code lives. So there's a lot of information you can put in this package JSON. Don't get too hung up on trying to figure out all this information in here. This is, the type of thing where you really would look it up for the most part if you're trying to work with it. There are a few things that are really useful in here when you get around to working with it yourself, but one of the main things to recognize is, I don't know if we've actually worked with JSON files before. I guess the actual pronunciation is JSON, but I hate calling them JSON files. I don't know. I prefer to call them JSON. But this should look very, very similar to what we're used to working with, because the JSON format is just JavaScript object notation. So these look like JavaScript objects. The only really important thing is that the keys for all of them are quoted. That's really what matters in a JSON file, is the keys are always quoted. And then for the most part, anything else that you can put in a JavaScript object, other than methods and actual code, but any just strings, arrays, etc., can go into a JSON file just like this. And so it's just a structure of different objects, right? This top level one has a property of requested, and that just happens to be another object. It also has a required by property, which is an array. So there's a lot of information in here. Not something that you have to have all the details of right now. So I'm going to close that. Don't want to look at that node modules folder, and do a couple things to help set up this project to be successful. The first one was I said you don't want to ever include the node modules folder in Git when you do commits, right? So let me go ahead and check here. Oh, I've got all these other files that I've changed in the intervening time. Now I'm going to do something because I don't want this new work that I did to mix up with my old work. So I'm just going to add the files that I care about that are the old work that I've been working with, which includes like zip.js, app.js, hello.js, incrementer.js, index.js, math.js, and ziptests.js. So I'm adding those to my working or my staged files. So if I look now, you'll see all of those have this different indication. That's telling you that they're staged for my next commit. And now I'm going to commit that just with a message. I'll say intro to common JS modules, because that's really when I did that work, right? Let me double check now, clear this. All right, it looks like it's just these new files that exist that are there. And also feel free, please ask questions on Slack while we're working through this. If anything is confusing or we're going too fast or you want to talk more about a specific area, because this is definitely going to be a lot more that I just sort of gloss over and touch on than normal classes, where I'm not going to dive into every little detail of different aspects of this. So if you see stuff that's confusing or you want to hear more about it, speak up. Okay, so I don't want, but if we look, like I do this git s, it's still telling me, oh, this node modules folder is there. It's just something that I'm not tracking yet. It's not something I'm dealing with. All right, so how do I fix that? Well, you can add in a Git project a git ignore file. So in any Git repository, you can add a git ignore file. Usually it's .gitignore is the name of the file. And then you can have a list of patterns that you want to exclude. So that might be, oh, here's an example of some. Let me see here. Oh, here's one that's more. Did they print their git ignore here? I don't see it. It's listing untracked files. This is a better one. So this is saying like anything VM Linux with anything else after it, hence the star, ignore that. So don't do those. Or here's an example that says exclude everything except for foo, and it can get a little tricky, but we don't need to do a very complicated one right now. We can keep ours really simple. So I'm going to add a git ignore file here. And in this git ignore file, I'm just going to say node modules. Anything in a node modules folder, and the slash is saying anything in this folder. I may have that syntax wrong. We're going to find out. Ignore it. So now let me do a git s, okay. I'm trying some things here. I want it to ignore anything in this node modules folder. So I may even Google this real fast just to double check and see what it says. I know I want to ignore this. So let me use the #1 programmer resource of Stack Overflow. See, that's what I thought. I should just need to do node modules slash. I had it right. So let me, oh, I put that in the wrong folder. I put that inside of my node modules. I need to move it. There we go. That's what was wrong. Now it should work. So if I do a git s now, you'll notice that node modules folder. Oh yeah, I should type this stuff out. Status is what I'm doing. Git status. I have git s mapped to a shortened version of git status for me. Sorry, I forget that I do that sometimes. So if I do git status, you can see that it no longer shows this node modules folder. And that's because we added a git ignore folder that says, git, you don't care about node modules. Don't worry about it. All right, so I'm going to commit that. I'm going to add the git ignore and commit it. Ignore node modules folder is like the message I want for that. So now my status, all it sees is this package lock.json file. And don't worry about the package lock.json file right now. We'll maybe touch on that just a little bit later in class, but not too much. So if I said I wanted to ignore the node modules folder, that's great. But how do I actually use this UUID package that I just pulled down? And this is where there's something really nice about the way that Node integrates with this node modules folder. Node will look for any modules in that node modules folder. So unlike this .hello.js, since that was our own, we had to tell it where to find it. Like, oh, look in this same folder. To get this UUID, because it's a node module that we installed and it's in that node modules folder in a way that's expected, we won't have to do that same thing. So I'm going to go back here and just look at the documentation. And it will tell me how to use this bit of code. It says, oh, I can import or require just like this. And then that gives me a method or a function I can call. And that's a version 1 UUID. Or I can get a version 3. Version 3 is too complicated. Version 1 looks simpler. So I'm going to leverage this code that they told me about. Except I want to just go ahead and log this. So let's say console.log. Generating UUID, and then we'll just call this right here in our template literal. And for now, I don't care about printing this out. I just want to do this UUID bit. So let's see if this works. Sweet. So now we're pulling in somebody else's code that we never wrote, and we don't have to figure out how we generate this long string according to the specification, which if we go back and look for a second, they have a link to the specification here. This is the rule, all the documentation for how you generate that UUID correctly. So there's a whole bunch of information about how you generate a UUID that's spec compliant. And I have worked with UUIDs for years and years and years, and I don't know one bit about how they're generated, what the specification is. Because that doesn't matter to me. Because I don't care how they're created. What I care is that I understand what I'm working with, a UUID, and that I can use it in my code as needed. And by using this package or another similar package in other languages, I can pull it in and leverage it. And one of the things I said was it gets a unique ID. You'll notice every time we run this, it's a different UUID. It's never the same. And I think at the size of these numbers, with how many digits there are and the fact that numbers are included, like I said, the odds of UUID collision, like where two of them are the same, Only after generating a billion UUIDs every second for the next 100 years, the probability of creating just one duplicate would be about 50%. So there you go. It would be incredibly hard to ever have a collision. But we've got a nice, easy way to get unique identifiers, right? Any questions about what we're going through so far? Speak up right now. I'm going to go grab some water, so I'll be back in just a second. So speak up if there's any questions about this, and then we're going to keep building on this. I'll talk about that package.json folder or file that doesn't exist right now, and sort of show you why it's important and then what it does, and we'll generate one for this project as well, and then we'll continue to build. Ooh, Pig Latin, nice. All right, not seeing anything so far for questions. So let's keep going. Now, what I said, if you remember, is never check this node modules folder into Git. And that's because you should be able to easily recreate the modules that you have. This is just installed versions of them. Pardon me. So I'm going to delete this real fast, get rid of it, and try and run my program, and we should fail. And we fail because it couldn't find the UUID package. No surprise, right? Well, normally the way you could solve that, if you were in your project, is by running git install. Or not git install, sorry. NPM install. So normally that's what you would do, but we're going to see an error here, right? No such file or directory, package.json. Uh-oh. NPM install by itself, without those extra parameters, is looking for this package.json file for some reason. Okay, so I need to reinstall this UUID package now. But first, what I want to do is create a package.json. So I'm going to do npm init. I'm going to jot down some of these commands too to make sure that I put some of this stuff on cheat sheets. So I'm going to run npm init. And what this is going to do, it'll even tell me right there. Look, I don't even need to tell you. We'll walk you through creating a package.json file. It only covers creating the most common items. So what do I want my package name to be? Code the Dream JavaScript classwork? Sure. What version is it? It's not even version 1. It's 0.1. Oh, it won't let me do that? Let me see. Okay, fine. What is the description? Entry point. Well, this won't really matter for what we're using it for right now. I'll just leave it as index.js. It's sort of a default. What's the test command? We don't have one right now. What's the Git repository? You notice it actually read the Git repository value out of Git because it was able to see that this is a Git folder already. Are there any keywords? Doesn't really matter. author, you know, you can put your name if you want. If you're doing something like this, what's the license? This really is one of those things that doesn't matter for this. I'm just going to say MIT. And now what you'll see is here's what it says it's going to generate. Here's this package JSON file that's going to be created. Much simpler than the other one we just saw, right? And a lot of this isn't even needed. You don't have to have a license or a homepage or URL or repository or even this test bit. Really all you need is a basic name, a version number. I think that's all you actually need is a name and a version number for a minimal package JSON file. But I put this other stuff in. It's fine. Yes. All right. So now we've got a package.json file, which is awesome, with some basic information about our project. And what if I try now to run NPM install, which didn't work before? What's going to happen? It says up to date. It took it about 1 second. You guys probably, because the NPM and Node version on Cloud 9 is old, you're not going to see this sort of vulnerabilities information. But I don't have a Node modules folder still. And if I tried to run index, it's still going to fail. And that's because that UUID package is no longer installed. So I'm going to run that command we did originally to install it. And I'm going to save it. And once again, we've got a Node modules folder. But the other important thing is in this package JSON file, it added some information. It says, oh, your project is dependent on the UUID package, and the version of that package that you're dependent on is 3.3.2, and this is just means like a minor version difference. So don't worry too much about that. That basically means like this last digit, the one after this second period can change. So it could install 3.3.3 or 3.3.4 when it installs. But the one that was specified originally was 3.3.2. So by doing that now, we have a history of what packages this one, the package we're creating, depends on, right? And we also have the Node modules folder. So I can run, again, node index.js, and sure enough, the code's running just fine. And if, again, I delete the Node modules folder, all right, I deleted that. It's going to fail. But the way I fix that is just by doing npm install. It will look at the package JSON, find everything that this says it depends on, and install it in my Node modules folder. I didn't need to run npm install again. I needed to run this. There we go. So that's why you don't see people including their Node modules folder in their Git repository usually, because you can refetch those packages, those dependencies from the NPM registry when you need them just by running that npm install command. So instead of putting all that stuff up in Git and storing a lot more information that you need, you can rely on them being on that npm registry. That also explains, by the way, when we were talking about stuff last class, we joked about how leftpad got removed from the npm registry, and that blew a whole bunch of projects up. That's why that happens when that sort of thing occurs, is people are not saving their Node modules folder. They're not saving the actual code. They're just pulling it down again the next time that they run a build. And then if that package is no longer, that package no longer exists in the npm repository, that build's going to fail because it can't get one of the packages it needs. So now I've got, let's look at what our changes are. All right, I've got this index.js, I've got this package block, which again, for now, let's just gloss over. I'm not too worried about it. It's very, very simple right now. But all this file does is this is an explicit version file. This says this is the actual version you installed of each one of these packages, and here's the ones that they depend on, right? Because this says, oh, you can install anything like this. The package lock says this is exactly what you installed. And that's really important for larger teams or production systems where you need to make sure that what you install when you set up a system is exactly what you tested, because if there's any difference, you may have a bug that you didn't expect to have. So that's where that comes in handy. But I've got these simple changes in here. I want to commit these. So I'm going to add all these. But oh, let me quit using get s again. I keep forgetting. Get status. Okay, now it says I've got these stashed or in my staging area. So added UUID NPM package. All right. If I do get status, nothing to commit. Everything's nice and clean. So hopefully this is making sense so far. Nothing too confusing. So let's talk a little bit about the different types of packages that are on NPM. Because we're pulling in one simple one, right? The NPM registry, being as big as it is, having over 800,000 different packages on it, contains all kinds of packages that can meet all sorts of different needs. So the first one, like category of packages, are these really small packages. These are ones that contain one, maybe just a few functions, not a lot in there. So examples of those are this UUID one that we just pulled down. Dedupe might be a good example of one. Dedupe is a package that all it does is it removes duplicate values from an array. So if we go look at the documentation for it, if you have an array 1, 2, 2, 3, and you call dedupe and store the results in B, you get an array of just 1, 2, 3 because there was a duplicate of 2. That's a little nice, little tiny useful utility, right? So those types of things exist up on NPM. Or better title case, that's going to convert a string to a case. So that's just, if we go look at it in some of the documentation, it says, oh, if we had nothing to be afraid of, it's going to convert that to, oh, that's interesting. I don't think that that's necessarily a change, but it should be converting it to proper title case for this, right? Oh, that's a good example. Oh, if you title case this one, it converts it to this, nothing to be afraid of. So small little utilities, one function, just a few functions. That's one of the categories of stuff you're going to find up on NPM. Now, you'll find a group of, there's really a divide in the front-end community over whether stuff should be these tiny little utilities and you should have a ton of dependencies that you pull in that way, or whether you should have something larger. So the next category is libraries. And this is really probably the broadest category of stuff that's up there in some way or another. So these are going to be things that contain a lot of functions and methods. Usually there's stuff that work well together or provide some unique set of functionality. So I've chosen 3 that I think are really good examples of powerful libraries that you would use from NPM. Lodash or underscore is another one that this forked from originally. This is just an absolute ton of useful little utility functions and other things that you can use. So if we, let me try and go to the Lodash documentation, because I pull this stuff up all the time. I even have it as one of my built-in things when I'm working in this devdocs.io, but I'll go to their actual documentation just to look at this library. It's a JavaScript utility library delivering modularity, performance, and extras. Okay, well, that's not a lot of explanation. So what does it sort of give us? Maybe we can look at, gives us a ton of methods to work on different things. We can work on functions, arrays, language. We even get some math, some stuff to work with numbers and objects, sequences, strings. All of this exists in this one library that you would pull down. So let's look at maybe some of the string tools. Oh, we can camel case. Okay. So it'll camel case this string foobar, getting rid of any spaces and other stuff, and turn it into foobar. Awesome. We can kebab case. That's going to put dashes in between the words instead. We can add some padding to the beginning or end of a string as needed. Pad it with any character that we want. We can split using any separator. We can trim different stuff. We can figure out, split the string into the array of words that are in there. Uppercase or lowercase it. All right, I mean, a fair bit of those already exist in the existing JavaScript code now, but there's still a lot there that's really handy, which is nice. Let's take a look at like array. What can we do with arrays here? What are just some of the massive, there's so much that it's gonna have. I mean, I use this tool quite frequently and I don't know everything in it, right? So it's got a concatenation one to concatenate arrays. Okay, well, we already have that in JavaScript, but what about this? Oh, a difference of arrays. Creates an array of array values not included in the other given arrays. So let's see what this means. The difference between 2, 1, the array 2, 1, and 2, 3 is 1, because 1 is the only value in this first array not included in the second array. Well, that could be really handy, depending on what you're working with. We can get the front of an array, like the first element of an array. We can remove something from an array, and we can even do it based off of some rules. So we can remove all of the even numbers from an array using this sort of tool where it's going to be able to let us remove stuff nicely. We can get some slices of it. We can figure out the union of them. Oh, here's zip, which by the way is going to be different than what I did probably. Yeah. So what this will do is actually make arrays of all of them. I did zip different than the actual way that most things do it because it was just a little easier to work with it that way. But zip creates an array of grouped elements, the first of which contains the first elements of the given arrays, the second with the second of the other ones, etc. So we get A1 and true. We get B2 and false. And the interesting thing about some of these tools is like this zip, we can pass it as many arrays as we want, right? I mean, there are incredibly powerful tools here. Collection is interesting because this will actually work on anything that Lodash can see as a collection. So that includes objects and arrays. So any of this collection stuff can actually work on objects or arrays. So we've got a shuffle, creates an array of shuffled values. That's really handy, you know? So let's go ahead and start using some of this. Let's play with some Lodash stuff. So what I'm gonna do is NPM install Lodash. Let me check if that's the right syntax. Yep. And I want to save it. All right, so we added this Lodash package. Now you're probably going to see some interesting stuff. Let me see. Uh-oh, was I in another folder when I did that? No, I should be here. All right, let me refresh. There we go. So now we've included the Lodash package. And now we can start doing something with, say, Lodash. So let's, I'm going to switch this from const because I forgot we weren't using that yet. Bar, and underscore is typically the way that Lodash or underscore is brought in. It's by tradition that they're assigned to those. I don't necessarily love that, but I want to follow the patterns that are common so that I'm not doing something very different. You could instead assign it to a variable named like Lodash if you want. And if you haven't figured it out, that's the pun, right? The original library was called underscore and Lodash forked, but it's very, very similar. So an underscore is like a Lodash. It's a horrible pun. Okay. So what do we want to play with? Oh, let's play with the shuffle, right? That seems fun. So I'm going to log a shuffle of an array of values. All right. So let's see what we get with this. Oops, I don't need to reinstall that. Let's try this. Nice. So we're getting, and you notice again, just like before, it shuffles it uniquely every time, just like this UUID is unique. But look at that. We didn't have to write any code ourselves to be able to figure out how to randomly shuffle up the values in an array. We just called this Lodash shuffle. It shuffles everything up for us. And now we've got this really powerful bit of functionality with almost no code that we had to write. So if we can shuffle, what about sort? Yeah, we can sort. Let me check if array has it just built in. I mean, they do, but that's sort of built into an array anyways, so it's not something that we necessarily need to do. It's already built into the array in JavaScript. So let's play with some of these other ones. What do we get? Sample. Oh, returns a random element out of an array. That's cool. Partition. Oh, we could partition stuff off of some rule. So we can create two groups from an array or any collection, because remember, see, if you look here, the collection is an array of objects, right? So anything that it sees as a collection, we can work with. Okay, so that let's play with that. Let's try this partition. How does it work? I can give it a function, and as let me read the documentation here. The first of which contains elements, predicate returns truthy for. So the second argument is the predicate, and if it returns truthy, then the first array will contain those. All right, let's play with that for a second. Let's continue to, I'm going to take this array and this shuffle bit. I'm going to make it even a little longer. And then let me go look at the documentation. Creates an array of elements split into two groups, the first of which contains elements. Okay. So let's see if I can make this work. I want to partition it. When I'm passing in, it's my shuffled array, and my function is very simple. It checks for each item, so I'll just call that the item. And what I want is to return truthy if it's even. So return item mod 2, which is the sort of shorthand to say, you know, this is a way to say if mod 2, then it's even, otherwise it's going to be false. So then let me see if this worked right. Even, odd. Backwards here. Truthy, hold on. Oh, that's right, I have it backwards. Any number other than 0 is truthy, 0 is falsy. So I want to flip that, get the negation of that, and oh, I've got something that can split my one array into an array of 2 different arrays with all the even on one side and all the odd on the other, right? Really handy, really useful. I didn't have to write very much code at all to do that. Now, it does require sort of understanding that documentation. You notice I had to go over here and read this stuff. I had to look at these examples and try and figure out what it's doing. That's why I've put a lot of emphasis on learning how to read documentation, learning how to read other code, because that's something that you really have to be able to do all these libraries that exist. All right, so Lodash, that's a really, really powerful library. What else do we have here? jQuery. Some of you may already be familiar with it. jQuery is, I would say, the library for browser DOM operations. There's other ones, and sometimes you don't need jQuery, but if you're working inside of a browser, you're trying to access certain elements, certain HTML elements, you're trying to change some styling dynamically, you're trying to add some animations, and you're doing that without using a larger framework like React or something, jQuery is the one that is used more than anything else. And part of the reason why you use a library like that is because browsers, now they've gotten a lot better recently, but browsers used to have very different ways to do certain things. Oh, I want to add an event handler when somebody clicks this button. It used to be very different between Internet Explorer and Firefox. And so being able to use jQuery to know which browser you're on and translate it to what you need, and you only have to write the code once, is incredibly useful. So that's another really, really powerful library. I did not mean to leave my stuff. But that has its own documentation. And there's just tons and tons of information about how to work with jQuery and all of the different tools that it has, adding stuff into the DOM, checking for certain elements, seeing if stuff's in there. It's massive. Math.js is a really interesting one for anybody who is really interested on the math side. This is a very, very powerful library that gives you tons of math capabilities. Like, it's got some basic functions like atan, log, square root. Yeah, some of those already exist, but look, it can even figure out a derivative for you. It can evaluate a string statement and turn that into something that it can work with, including sign power. Has, if you go look documentation for it, let me see here. It has support for arbitrarily large numbers. It can handle interesting fractions. It gives you a lot of matrix math logic. So if you've ever had to work with matrix math, this is a library that you can pull in to do some of that work for you instead of having to do it by hand or write your own matrix math logic. Matrix math logic is used, for example, very heavily in video games and very heavily in machine learning spaces or data processing spaces. And here's a nice little library that can do that for you. And you can even go a level above that. I said, oh, this is really useful in these data processing spaces or machine learning, right? Let's see what we have here. A machine learning library that you can pull in from NPM. Now, this is going to take a really long time to figure out what you're doing and working with, but that's an example of one you can pull in. There's other ones that are much easier to work with because they don't give you as much capability or they're very limited, right? Let me see. If we can look at, like, say, sentiment. So here's libraries that might give you some sentiment analysis based off of some text. So you'd be able to put some text in. And it's going to tell you what types of sentiment it thinks are within that body of text, right? Which is really awesome. And then, let me see if I have more. Okay, yeah. So then another category, this is a really interesting one, of things that you can get from NPM are command line tools. These are things that aren't even going to necessarily be something that you embed in your JavaScript code. You'll usually install these in a different way than you install the other libraries. You'll install these quote unquote globally so that you can call them from the command line anytime you want. But there's a whole bunch of command line tools. So let's have a fun one first. We've got like a vaca, just get a random ASCII cow. And so if I want to be able to do this anywhere on my computer, I can install it that way and then call it. Now I'm going to do it not that exact way because I don't want to have it installed globally. But I have access to this npx command, which will pull it down and run it just once real fast. So this is a lot like that Benny Hill music I was playing the other day, or the other cow. Oh, there we go. We got a cow printed out. This is a human cow. And we can do another one. Oh, this is a really small cow because we're really high up. Yeah. This is the cow that jumped over the moon. All right, I'm sold. I'm sold on the cow that jumped over the moon. But you can also get actually useful utilities, not just toys. An example of one is HTTP server. So this is a really, really simple HTTP server that you can install, and boom, suddenly you can serve up HTTP files locally as opposed to accessing them other ways. And that's the exact same thing. If I did like npx HTTP server, it would tell me I now have an HTTP server running in this folder right here. And so I can access it. And I can see all of my files because that's what I have there. But now if I create like a index.html, let me see here. Oh, there we go. We got a basic HTML file here. I'm serving it up, and I'm not serving it up as a local file. It's actually an HTML file, or it's being served up from a web server, which means I have access to all of the basic functionality. It can load JavaScript files and perform other actions and make requests. So that gives me a ton of possibility just right there, and I didn't have to do anything to get that very simple server, right? Something very basic, took almost no work. I see someone saying, John, isn't there an NPM for live editing? I would need more explanation about what you mean by live editing. You mean live editing of a web page? There's some interesting stuff you can do. It's not just an NPM module. There's ways you can set stuff up called like hot reloading or live reloading that would let you do something. We will be leveraging that in our React class. We'll be using some hot reloading libraries, which will sort of just come almost for free. And so you should get some exposure to that at that point. All right, what else do we have here? And then this is probably, you'll have about as many of these as you'll have libraries, and it's sort of tough to say what's a framework versus what's a library. I think the React team call their product a library, but I prefer to call it a framework. So you can get entire frameworks for doing development from NPM. And these are things that will help you build out an application in a lot of different ways. And it all comes down from NPM without you necessarily having to do a lot of work yourself. So React is a good example of it. You can go fetch down the React library or framework and start doing React development, but a lot comes down when you do that. Or Ember is a good example. Here, I'll give you an example of something from NPM that sort of combines a lot of these for a moment. I'm going to, first off, I'm going to create a new folder here. Woo, look at that. It's huge. All right. So I'm going to move down, create another folder. Oh, actually, no, I'm not even going to do that. I'm going to combine a couple things here. So I'm going to combine an NPM command line tool that I would want to use with something else. So I'm going to install a tool, but I'm going to do that -G for global or -- global. I'm going to install create React app. And this is going to take a little while, but this is a command line tool that will let me quickly spin up the starting framework, the starting scaffolding I need to create a React application. And so now I can call this tool create React app and give it a folder name that I want to start in. Test app. Because of NPM naming restrictions. Oh, name can no longer contain capital letters. All right, I'll name it test app. And now this tool is going and fetching a whole bunch of other things using NPM, installing them, setting up what I need, getting me started. And we'll be able to see this in just a moment. While we're waiting on this, any questions about what we're working on so far here? It can be questions about, NPM, working with other packages, questions about any of the files that we've seen. One thing I'll say is if you start getting into actual production development, one thing you have to pay attention to is the license on the different packages, because not everything that gets put up on NPM as a package is open source where you can just pull it in and use it in your code without paying for it or without giving attribution back to the person who originally wrote it. So if you start building out production stuff using some of these, it's worth spending a little bit of time checking over your licenses and just making sure that everything is the type of license that you can use in the application that you're building. That's beyond this class, though. All right, let's see what we got. It tells me I just go into this test app folder and run npm start. So I'm going to go in here. I'll see if I can start my it didn't want to. All right, I'm going to open another window of this. So let's open a new window. I don't know why it never does that, but and this is test app. And let's see what we got there when it spun everything up, right? What did this give us? Oh, look, it gave us a git ignore file already, which ignores the node modules folder and a whole bunch of other folders that it knows it needs to ignore. That's fantastic. We've got a huge README file that tells me tons of information about how to work with this application. And if we look at our package.json, we've got some interesting stuff. And we will be talking more about working with this stuff in your package.json, but this scripts command, that lets you execute certain commands from inside of your folder with so that's a useful tool to help you perform certain actions. Let's not worry too much about it right now. What do we have over here in our source folder? Oh, we've got some actual code. Here's a index.js file and an app.js file. This is like a little React application bit. In public, we have an index.html file. Yeah, there's a lot of clutter and stuff in here we don't need to worry about right now. And then if we go look at this node modules folder, this is what I was talking about before, is we've got hundreds of packages that got installed. When you start scaling up, like the React application or React framework, for example, relies on dozens of other packages to do some of the functionality under the covers. And so it very quickly scales up where you're pulling in tons and tons of other packages. And that happens because, for example, let me see if I can find one here. Let's look for the React, because that should be here. React. There we go. If we look at the package JSON for React, it says it has dependencies on scheduler, prop types, object assign, and loose envify. All right. Let's look for some of those. We're down by R. There's that scheduler package. That's why we got the scheduler package installed when we pulled this down, is because the React package needed the scheduler package. So NPM, when it tried to figure out what to install, said, oh, you want to install React? What does it need? Oh, it needs scheduler. Now, does scheduler need any other packages? Let's see. Oh, looks like scheduler. Oh yeah, scheduler needs loose envify and object assign. Oh, well then, let's see, oh yeah, object assign is here because they both needed it. And the loose envify was needed by both, so it got installed. So it's doing a lot of complex work under the covers to figure out what all you need to get installed. And now let's go look at what this said here, because it gave us some notes. It says, I can go into this folder and run npm start to start the development server, or npm test to start the test runner. Now let's go check it out. So I'm going to go into that folder, or I'm going to run those now. What about npm start? What happens? Taking a while, taking a while. What's going on? Spinning some stuff up here. Hey, there we go. We've got a little React application right here. And to get started with that, we didn't have to write anything. We just pulled some bits down and we've got this running, right? Really nice and handy. Okay, well, it also said I could run npm test to do a test runner. Let's see what that does. No tests found related to files changed since last commit. Let's just run all the tests. So this here is actually, let me go see the code that we have for this one. This is actually running this app.test here, which this should, even if you're not familiar with all of it, this should look pretty similar to the type of stuff we were writing for our tests for, say, our zip function before, right? Is we were creating something that says, oh, it should do this. This is what I expect. Take some action, verify it. That's what's happening, except we've got a little test runner going on that will literally just keep running and testing to make sure that your code is working all the time while you're changing it. And we'll get into that later. We're going to dive a lot more into that. That's just another example of the type of stuff you can pull down when you're working with NPM. Is you can get something that will spin up this whole ecosystem really quickly on you. And that Create React app that we just used, we will be using that in the React course as our starting point for creating anything that we work with. So if you want to get a head start and play with it, feel free to npm install that Create React app and try it out and tinker with it, right? It should be intimidating at this point. We'll break it down, don't worry. But that's what we're going to be leveraging for that. So any questions on anything that we've been talking about so far today? Like I said, this was a much higher level in terms of we covered a lot of material. We didn't dive into all of the details of every bit of it. So it's not as like, oh, here's every aspect of this working with this. That's going to become a pattern that's more common as we keep scaling up to working with more stuff. Is we won't necessarily be able to cover every concept. That doesn't mean that we can't go back and touch on ones that people missed, or we can't go back and touch on ones that we didn't cover. If somebody's like, oh, what is this thing that we didn't talk about that's going on? How is that working? What is that doing? You're going to need to be willing to ask those questions and just chime in and say, I really want to understand this area more, or we skimmed over this part. Can we cover that more because I tried to dig into it and didn't understand all of it? But you're also going to need to be able to spend some time looking at some of this yourself and trying to figure it out as we keep building. So if there's is there a way for C9 to install a package locally? Yes. Yeah, if you want to install a package on C9, you just use the global approach. So let me close some of this. I don't care about that anymore. These packages like that Vaca one, for example, it'll show you how you do that. If you use this -- global or -G, that's how you install something globally that you can then reference from anywhere when you're in Cloud9. The difference between the npx command and global is when you use npx, it doesn't actually install it on your system. It puts it in a temporary folder, runs it, and then deletes it. So it's really useful if you don't want to clutter up your system with stuff that you don't use very often. So let's say for me, for example, I might, I need Create React App. It's a really useful tool, but maybe I only use it once every 6 months to create something new. Maybe I don't want it installed on my system permanently. I just want to be able to pull it down, run it, and then move on. And I'm willing to wait an extra minute or so to pull it down, run it, and move on and not have it sitting on my system. That's really what npx is for. So if you really love printing out cows and you want to print out cows in your command line all day, every day, install Vaca globally. Don't install it. Don't use npx. But if you just want to print it out once, you can use the npx command. All right. Well, I'm going to be around all weekend. If people have questions, I will be putting out some stuff built around some of the working with modules and trying to test some things going forward. And some of that is probably going to require you guys to pull down some packages that I'm going to push up to the NPM registry, because what I'm going to encourage you to do is try and write tests around them and find some bugs in it. So that may be something where you guys collectively online or in small groups or however you want to do it, when I put them up, you may want to talk about what you want to test, or what tests do we need to write to make sure that this is fully tested together, because it's going to be a challenge both in sort of building that out, thinking about code and like what needs to be tested, and then writing the tests to be able to test something and then being able to identify what's wrong or buggy. All right. I guess other than that, we can get going for today. Again, feel free to hit me up with questions anytime. I'll respond in text to this as well. Maybe my audio is a little bit delayed and you guys are behind or something. But yeah, I'll make sure I respond in text too. And see you guys. Well, I guess we'll be remote again Tuesday. So we'll be remote again on Tuesday, but I'll talk to you guys then.